What is a function? A function can really be thought of as a machine where you plug in one value and it gives you another. It is a relationship between values that is usually defined by an equation. For example, y equals 5x. Here, we plug in an 8 and the machine gives us 40. For a function to actually be a function in a mathematical sense, the output must depend on the input. This means that every input can only correspond to one output. Two inputs could correspond to the same output, and this is fine, but if one input corresponds to two different outputs, then the output no longer depends on the input, stopping the relationship for being a function. We can make sense of this with looking at equations. For example, y equals x squared is a function. It is fine that -2 and 2 both correspond to 4 because the important thing is that each input matches with only one output. Inputs can have the same output. The only problem is if one input has two outputs, like in x equals y squared, which is not a function. Here, the input corresponds to both positive square root 2 and negative square root 2. Y no longer depends on x. This is weird because how would the machine that we showed at the beginning know whether to put out a plus or negative square root 2 when we give it the input 2? This wouldn't work, so we say that x equals y squared is not a function. Graphs can also be used to tell whether or not a function is actually a function. To determine functionality for this, the one crucial thing that we have to look at is where the dots are placed. Are there any dots above another dot? If this is the case, then it is not a function, because this would mean that one input is going to two outputs. The vertical line test is a good way to check this. Basically, you just draw vertical lines on the graph and you see if there is one dot per vertical line. If some dots reoccur on a horizontal line, this is fine, because this just means that two different inputs are going to the same output, which is allowed for functions.